It is no mistake that live-action remakes of Disney films are extremely horrible and extremely useless, where the ones that could work haven't even been considered or even made. And to celebrate the upcoming release of the train wreck that will be known as Peter Pan and Wendy in the coming days as the release of this video, I decided to take a crack at ranking all the films that have been currently released under this genre. The most stupidest thing I have ever done in my life, where I will constantly update this list after each year when we will get more of them eventually. Other people haven't really done these videos yet, so I guess I'm just going to do it instead. This list is going to exclude any sequels to the remakes, as they are more original to these films, taking the basis of those very stories rather than the sequels of the original animated films, which of course do not relate in any way to adapting those stories and doing their own things, of which will get their own separate video, as more eventually will come out, sadly, like the Mufasa film that I am very excited about, believe me. But yes, this video is going to solely focus on the original remakes themselves and nothing else, where films like Alice are kind of sequels to the original story by making Alice a lot more older, containing memories of her adventures in Wonderland, but still that world from start to finish is remade and will be a part of that list for that reason, and of course, the title. And yes, we are going to include The Lion King because despite it not actually being live action, it still wants to be one. I'm also going to ignore Christopher Robin because that's a totally different story in its own right and nothing to do with the original Disney Winnie the Pooh movies. Cruella in that regard is more of a spin-off for her own character, and I really didn't actually watch it, and I don't actually feel like watching it, so that leaves that out. And also the other two Jungle Book movies that precede this one that Disney made will not actually be focused in this video because I never knew they even existed until I actually started writing this down and only wanted to focus on the main modern ones that most of us know every day, where you realize Disney has actually been doing this longer than you imagine, showing that they've been always this soulless apparently. So with those rules out of the way, I guess it's time to begin. Number 12, Lion King. Now let's be honest, if you watched any of my videos before this, you probably knew this was going to happen. There is nothing more atrociously awful than The Lion King 2019 from the fact it tried to be realistic and is in fact a remake. Yes, it is not live action, but it still doesn't mean they want to disguise it as such, because if the past goes to show, you need to turn everything that is false into something that is real, because animation is a genre rather than a medium in the modern corporate eyes for some reason. There's just so many baffling decisions that plague this movie, and it really is remarkable that this even got made, down to the very music, the acting, and the animation. Every single thing about this damn movie is so damn disrespectful to the original in every way possible. It's also very funny that the more real they tried to make it, the more fake it actually got, where you cannot at all pick out a single emotion from any of these animals, like previous Disney movies that actually used animals in this way to show more emotion than all of this. Even the Jungle Book movie that Jon Favreau directed before taking on this project had more emotion, where it truly baffles the mind how this can be the highest grossing animated film of all time. That doesn't even make any sense, and the worst part of all of this is that it really isn't the worst remake, because that title in my opinion belongs to Mulan for what it did, which I hate even more. It's just that this happens to exist and uses live action as a scapegoat for remaking their films. It just shouldn't exist to begin with. I know this can be said for the others, but this one really doesn't have anyone that is real in real human life. Like, that is a truly incomparable thing. Most of these films are made because they use humans to begin with, which is why they want to make them so that real actors can physically portray them and whatnot, doing the same exact thing over and over rather than being voice acted and animated yet again. I could talk about it more, but that would make me sick to my stomach and sad beyond belief, so I'm just gonna move on from this point and stop bearing witness to something so goddamn awful and something I just want to throw out of my mind from knowing of its own existence. Number 11, Mulan. I hate this movie. That's all I really want to say about this. Well, that and a lot more about it, where eventually I will be making an extensive thorough review about everything that went wrong with it, from the production to the film. There's just so many things to talk about it that went wrong that is just so incomprehensible that this company had made. In a similar vein to The Lion King, this movie feels so devoid of any life from its real human actors and removes the best elements about why Mulan actually worked to begin with. It's shocking how the director wanted to make it more real by removing parts that are more realistic than any approach they actually took with her, like giving her superpowers or adding more women to the story and the plot. It's not a bad thing to have more women in, like Mulan's grandmother that were in the original, but adding things like her sister and the bird lady make no sense. The story of the original Mulan only had her for the majority of the film because it was about her testing the status quo of the men, making them do different things and solving them in ways that they couldn't have done to begin with. Something different than their worn out methods that have been tested and true for centuries before this point. She acts more out of wit and not superpowers, and she tests everyone, including the Emperor, about such ideals that came out of her love of saving her father from dying in battle because of his age. In this one, however, it just made her devoted to the Emperor, willing to be executed because of her own actions that went against the grain of society, and just makes her a watered down Chinese version of Superman, where it is also highly disrespectful for Chinese culture according to the critics, where it was heavily panned by those who even watched it in China, the place where this film was actually heavily supposed to be marketed towards. Like I said, there's a lot more to discuss about this movie that I really want to dig in, but I just want to drive in the main point here about why I consider that to be one of the worst films of all time in that regard, for being a remake and just everything else about it that disrespect the original ballad despite casting Chinese actors in the film. Like, how could you possibly think that this was a good idea for anyone to actually see, let alone the Chinese? The people who give this a good review actually need their heads examined and watch the original to see the importance of what they actually tried to do originally. As I said at the start, I really hate this movie and I want to burn it in the eternal fires of hell for what it did to justify anything. Number 10. Pinocchio. Words cannot express how much I despise this film being directed by the guy who brought us classics like Back to the Future and Forrest Gump. It is so painful how much has went wrong in this film, and also what it does to the original, where unlike Mulan, it still kept the main story overall, but even that still gets beaten down into a pulp. And like Mulan in this case, they sort of made Pinocchio into this superhero. Well, not in the ways that are physically powered, but most of his traits, like in the original, he learned what he was doing was wrong, trying to fix his mistakes as he went along, but this, he knows exactly what to do throughout this, making him holier than thou attitude. It is also made worse by the fact that he's encouraged the lie to get him out of situations when he is trapped. Like, that is not the point of the scene, and the fact that they only put the blue fairy in one scene rather than this one to drill an important lesson that was there in the original in his head is just purely despicable and teaches the wrong examples for kids. There's also the issue of removal of cigarettes and beer from Pleasure Island, which also dilutes the point of the entire film. Instead, they actually put things like root beer, and he doesn't really take even one sip out of this whole sequence because of his holy personality. Like, he is supposed to be drinking and smoking to sell that point, but modern Disney cannot even be bothered to show those things because it's bad for kids for some reason, even though in the original they teach kids that it is bad, where it turns you into a donkey and you get sold into slavery. This is actually also one of Tom Hanks' worst roles ever. Like, I really don't know what the hell he was trying to do with Geppetto, and I find him to be unlikable in this film, with my opinion, with these random accents which are only just slightly better than what he did with Elvis and Tom Parker. Like, everything about this is bad and cringe as you can expect, with the decision to make Monstro more than just a whale is baffling to me. Like, why does he have this on him that makes him a totally different monster instead of a normal whale? Why can't he just be a normal whale? And why do you have to make him live at the end instead of being supposedly dead, where he finally gets resurrected as a real boy because of his sacrifice he did for his father? It just doesn't make sense, and I really hate how they leave it ambiguous to if he was a real boy or not, which is also the point of the entire movie. Like, he becomes real because he went through that journey. Like, my goodness, this is probably just one of the most painful ranking videos in history, where everything about these films is just utter shit. Number 9. Dumbo. You know, I actually rarely watch this film because it is utterly boring to me, which in a way is kind of similar to the original Dumbo film. I rarely watched that one too, because I mean, it was good to establish Disney as a force in animated films during the early days of those times, but I just don't like it amidst the sea of other Disney films, and I feel the same way about this. A lot of this film is actually more sold by the fact it has actors like Danny DeVito and Michael Keaton, who starred in other previous Disney films like Hercules and Pixar's Cars, where they are probably mostly the only good things about it. Everything else just spells extremely boring and utterly useless, stretching out something longer than it needs to be. The style may be interesting, but it just adds too much so that they could actually put their human actors interact with Dumbo, where a lot of the focus in the original film is on the animals themselves having personalities and where you don't really get that in this version, where at least they still manage to have expressions more than the Lion King. It was just a simple fact that the original didn't show much on their humans, where this one wanted to be the polar opposite in that regard, and in a way they both managed to fail under the scale on my radar, just focusing on one side of the story way more than it needs to for most of the characters, which are original in terms of you know what I mean, and I just didn't find it interesting, and it actually made me super sleepy watching it halfway through, hence why it is lower on the scale other than the others I actually hate more. Number 8. Aladdin. I think you can derive most of my hate for this movie from Genie and how it tried to make Will Smith's one capture some of the best elements of Robin Williams' version. It's not that I really hate his version, I appreciate what they tried to do with it, but overall it just didn't work for me because it is done in that shadow of the original Genie. I mean, there are good things to appreciate about this, like the set design, the performance of the actors, even some of the CGI, but overall it just really does suck, especially characters like Jafar. Like, a lot of the weight of this film, away from Genie in Aladdin, comes from the menace that Jafar supposedly is, the slimy snake that the character is mostly portrayed as, where this version really lacks in all terms of that and that charm, especially with Iago. I also didn't like that they gave Jasmine a song because that was never really important to be added. Yes, it's good, it adds something different, but I really don't think that it was really important to give her that moment when we already know much about her character and her experience with Aladdin. I mean, as good as it is to more focus on Jasmine, the focus is primarily on Aladdin's journey from a simple street rat scrapping for food to the man who gains the heart of a princess and breaks down the barriers of the common folk and the elite of the government. And another great thing that I like to add is that Genie gets to have a relationship and kids. It really separates the portrayals on those scales compared to a man who just wants his freedom and nothing more than that, if you get what I mean. But overall, the experience is mostly mediocre for a film that follows the same beats as the original, as we will see with the next film. Number 7, Beauty and the Beast. Beauty and the Beast is the first really major remake that takes most of the story of the original, as that is regarded as one of the greatest animated films ever made. Where of course it's that kind of movie you go expecting something and go getting what you expected and nothing more than that. The reason this is higher on the list is because of the fact it has a great song in Evermore. I'm not a big fan of the way that Dan Stevens sings the song in the film, not that I actually think he's bad, but the fact the way it sounded auto-tuned for the Beast. I'm not much into the music world, so I don't know much about that, but that's really just how I felt about the way it was performed, where I actually do like the song itself and the rendition done by Josh Groban, who played the Beast in the special anniversary, where I think that is actually better than this film overall anyway. Where on the other hand, I felt let down by Emma Watson as Belle. It's fine enough the way she looks, but the way she delivers the character compared to Paige O'Hara is a clear night and day difference from the singing to the regular acting. I just really don't feel that connection in her performance, and neither did I feel the same way for most of the cast, especially having people like Ewan McGregor or Ian McKellen as Lumiere and Cogsworth. It just didn't fit right to me compared to the expressiveness of the original characters. Luke Evans and Josh Gad do fine as Gaston and LeFou, but once again not as strong as the animated versions in both figurative and literal sense, where the reason this is high on this list is because it retained those facts as is and didn't change much, where everything else is a subtraction for me, and something I actually want to explain a little bit later about why I abhor it in full, but at least it has a better experience than the others in that regard, and the fact that the cursed characters have more expressions than the animals in Lion King. Number 6, Lady and the Tramp. Like Dumbo in this situation, I don't have any strong feelings toward this movie or the original, but I certainly had more interest in it, hence why it is higher on this list than the rest at this point. It's the first Disney Plus remake that started this new trend of releasing whatever is the oldest films on here to fill content, and it really does feel like that kind of thing. It's better than Dumbo in the case of how the characters interact with each other. In this case, they are more focused on the main characters rather than what Dumbo derived itself from, and also, yes, once again, they are more expressive than The Lion King. To sum this all up, I did read one review that perfectly describes this movie in every single way. It's hard to hate, but it's also hard to love. It's just that film in the middle, hence why it belongs here on this list, where it's just not bad enough to make me hate it, but it's just not good enough to make me love it for being a remake. It's just one of those perfect movies that kind of make you go, eh? Number 5, 101 Dalmatians. This is probably the first real remake that actually went mainstream, where before this we had the Jungle Book film I discussed earlier, but no one actually remembers that, where this is the actual one I remember from my childhood, where once again it is the case where it becomes another movie. The animals in this film are actually real because it is the older one, where for that reason they actually don't talk like they did in the original film. Most of this movie is still carried by the performance of Glenn Close as Cruella, and it really shows where it is that so-and-so attitude for the rest of the cast, including Hugh Laurie in that conversation, who I admire from House. I mean, I did have good memories watching it with family when I was younger, but I never really thought back on it much being part of the old mid-90s Disney live-action films. But like I said, there's a lot more fun about this film than the rest, but still disappointing for the focus that they've had on the dogs instead on the humans. I do find it more impressive than the first film that had real animals compared to these newer ones, which are literally fake, and I can actually tell that, or once again, actually in this case, the dogs are actually more expressive than that of The Lion King. I also realize that every time something has animals in it, I'm just going to eventually end the segment saying that everything is better than that film because it is completely true in all the right ways that are possibly imaginable. 4. Alice in Wonderland. Yeah, this was actually the first real remake that most of us watched in theaters and the one that really set in stone in motion for the era that we all know today. The reason it is high on this list is because of the wacky nature of the movie and how it actually took the story in a different direction, being a reimagining from the original Alice with a story that already experienced those adventures. Yes, it might have a lot of the same elements that we know of that were present in the original, but it actually tries to be something different in other ways, being primarily marketed as a newer adaptation of Lewis Carroll's work. Hence why it's still more higher up on the list, because at the very least, it takes something more different than the original, where the rest followed the other Disney stories. The reason it is not actually higher in my opinion is because it is wacky and it is weird. It's just truly one of those mixed films, where I'm not fully sold on everything because it looks weird as hell, but I appreciate Tim Burton for actually trying to stick with that very style because it represents the wonders of Wonderland. And of course, the other reason it's not going to be high is because of that atrocious big ass head of the queen. Like, ew, I'm not going to put this film high on the pedestal of remakes because of that stinky ass decisions. And yes, don't worry about it, the animals in this film, of course, although rougher in animation because it is an earlier film, are still more expressive than The Lion King. Number 3, Jungle Book. Well, as it turns out, for some odd reason, Jon Favreau actually directed a good remake in The Jungle Book, where once again, these animals are still more expressive than The Lion King that he directed himself. Like, I really don't understand that. Plus, like Alice, it changes a lot of things from the original and adds from the baseline of Jungle Book. I do realize that now when I actually watched it, and actually can concur with the positive reviews that come out, but also baffled at the distinctively different decisions from this one and The Lion King. I also really did enjoy the performances from people like Bill Murray to Idris Elba, to name a few of the really star-studded cast that this film had for its animal characters. But despite these reasoning, the most that made audiences attracted to it is the fact that they actually kept the songs that most of us love. After all, they are Disney classics still held up in the modern era from one of the last ones that were supervised under Walt Disney. It just is a better experience for that, for using those two worlds together, and I truly see that appeal. I just don't rank it as high for what happens in the other two. 2. Maleficent. You know, it's a bit of a surprise myself that this one is high on this list, but as a remake, it still keeps in tone with the original Sleeping Beauty, but in a different direction that signifies it as a reimagining. You just notice the higher things that they are on this list, the more original they are in the story. For the middle part, we see it does take the same story that we've seen in the original film, but for the rest of it, they actually diverge from what we know of in that very film. Of course, this is a film that focuses on Maleficent instead, and her background, where you actually get more in depth to her character, which I actually really liked about this film when I first saw it. Of course, my hatred for this genre has grown, and I actually do question some of the decisions of this movie, but I still have the same likes for what they attempted to do. Yes, there are plenty of inconsistency in this entire movie, but it doesn't take away from the differing story of the famed villain, especially for Angelina Jolie's performance, which he really does fit that very role of Maleficent. The best thing that I actually do like about this switcheroo on the characters is to make her more of the hero or anti-hero in this case, while King Stefan is the villain who used her love for him as a way to gain power, where you really understand that hurt and motivation compared to the simplicity of Sleeping Beauty that they don't really focus on that and more on Aurora. I mean, she is a focal point of the story, but not as much as the original, being instead in this film the mediator between the two worlds, that both of them share the love for this very daughter who bridges the gap between them, not wanting to focus on that typical grain of the story, and it's why I like it for that reason, where otherwise it truly is a mediocre film with various inconsistent patterns it displays, and it's not a good experience overall. Number 1, Cinderella. This film really is the highest point that a remake could ever go. It's a stunning take on the original and actually adds on it from what was intended. It's just visually stunning, designed well, and acted perfectly. It's a mix between the different variations of stories while still retaining the main core concept of the plot. They do remove the songs of the story, but you actually understand that in the context of the film to why they don't need it, and I actually really love how much they actually gave to Prince Charming's story, where in this case his name is actually Kit, where it actually adds more to the original that it actually didn't have and sets up better motivations for that very characters. I also love the touch that they actually added to primarily call her Ella from her parents, because the Cinderella name is what is derived from her evil step-family called to mock her. For one who actually upholds the idea of her parents to be kind and true to her heart, where adding more of the mother and father of the Cinderella story really makes her character shine in both the figurative and literal sense. And that's why I really appreciate being the remake it was. It's just one that adds more heart to such the characters, like making the dying king stand out more than the original, just having the father want to have his son find love or whatever to continue his lineage. Everything about it just adds more weight to Kit's decisions to respect his legacy and everything about the film. It doesn't degrade it, it actually perfects it in that case, and why it is respectful as the Disney movie that saved Disney during that very time. It is truly, without a doubt, the movie that Disney wants out of all their remakes, the one that people love, that recaptured their heart about it most. I would also like to add, I didn't have a problem with the animated characters because they are small all, and when they turned into real humans, where they don't actually add much weight on the story like they did in the original, which is actually a better choice. And once again, in this case, they are still much more expressive than The Lion King. It's just something that is more of a minor bearing on the story that focuses on Ella and what kind of story they actually wanted to tell that is sweet for young girls to watch, and the nostalgia it has over the older films they love. Where other than that, just like the rest, they're still part of the worst genre of Disney films, and nothing will change that, and most of them still suck as is. Overall, Disney's live action films haven't been impressive and can only be expanded further down into chaos as we move on in life with new subsequent releases. I just really can't see many Cinderellas or Maleficents down the line sticking toe to toe with the story and diluting the original films as is. It's just that Disney is that corporation now, and there's nothing we can really do about it. And what I learned from this experience is that I really still hate most of them all for what they actually are, and this video hasn't really changed that despite ranking it on its enjoyment, and I still cannot wait to thoroughly review the other films which I will hate with all my heart. I just feel so thoroughly exhausted and disappointed for the age that I live in and the reviews that I give out. I didn't actually think this was good, but then again, there isn't much to go off for these stories that I've already seen before one way or other. But I do hope you enjoyed this ranking. Feel free to disagree or comment your own ranking instead about why it might be better than mine. And with that said, I'm all done, so goodbye.